Okay, so welcome everybody. This is CS 7642, Reinforcement Learning and Decision Making. The special guest for today is Dr. Ashley Edwards. A quick intro that I have here for her is, she's a research scientist working on reinforcement learning at DeepMind. She obtained her Ph.D. in computer science from Georgia Tech. Under the supervision of Professor, we should say probably Dean, Charles Isbell in 2019. She was formerly a research scientist at Uber AI Labs, and during her time as a PhD student, was a recipient of the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, was a visiting researcher at Waseda University in Japan, Taka, an intern at Google Brain. She received a bachelor's in science in computer science from the University of Georgia in 2011. So a couple of things interesting there. So you are both UGA and Georgia Tech, huh? That's pretty interesting. How'd that work for you?
It was, honestly, it was kind of hard when I first started. I mean, people from Georgia Tech really hate people from UGA because we always win in football. So yeah, I got a lot of hate when I first started.
Wait. When you say we, you mean we what? You mean Georgia Tech? You mean UGA? No,
UGA.
I'm kidding. Teasing, totally teasing. I know.
Yeah. I'm a dog fan for life.
Oh my goodness, that is hilarious. So, some of our students don't know, but you are actually, I'm going to call you the original TA for this course. So you are actually let's say the parent of all of the TAs in this course. You TA the first iteration of this course with with Michael and Charles as very active in Piazza, and you were the only one. Of course, Chris and Pushkar kind of helped, but you were actually the one leading the office hours. Any good memories that you want to share there?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was a long time ago. How long? When was this actually? Like
2015, fall of 2015. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. It was interesting because it was, I guess, the first time that Charles and Michael had done this sort of, well, actually machine learning was the first time, but this is the first time they'd done like this reinforcement learning course. And so it was very new. It was the first time I'd ever TA'd an online course, so it was definitely very interesting. I don't know, it's very fun. It's been interesting to see like reinforcement learning grow as a field, and now there are courses on it, and like people are interested in it. So I don't know, it was just an interesting experience, I think, because of that. I think it's definitely gotten a lot better since I started. Like you've really taken it and really like have grown it. Like this sort of thing, like I would have never thought of doing that. So I think you and Tim have done like a really good job. Like an amazing job, actually.
The whole group. But we have good example. No, I remember. I mean, you actually did many office hours, and actually by yourself, which is very hard. I actually that is you gotta admire that, because it's we actually at least sometimes team up and receive the questions as a group. But when you are like one-on-one, oh my goodness. So yeah. And then you actually joined or returned for I think it was 2 more semesters or 1 more semester, I forget, but I think it was spring and then the summer maybe, I'm not so sure. But yeah, so instead of welcome back. And
Thank you.
So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna go over. We have a bunch of questions. Received lots of really great questions. Many were actually way too technical. Some students actually sent me a whole 3-page PDF in LaTeX. No, I'm serious. Like I was like, you don't have to do this. But I thought it was really nice because the students were really interested in your work. So, but to some extent, if we go too much into the technical side, some students are just gonna not understand what's going on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna introduce a little bit of the concepts that you work most of the time. So you can explain it with your own words, and then we're gonna go into some of your papers. They actually send questions related to all of your papers. So well, most of them, including like the 2017, the multi gamma discount factors, and pretty old papers even. Yeah, no, I'm serious. Like Lots of
Okay.
really good questions, but I try to only pick questions related to two papers so that we can, go through that technical area as well. And then we're going to continue to more career oriented type of
Yeah.
questions. Now, Chris is going to help us with the questions, and, all of the TAs are going to follow up if we have any comments or anything. Any questions so far, or ready to go?
Yeah, no, it sounds good.
Awesome. All right, let's get it started, Chris.
Great. So we can start with some level setting. This course has been focused on RL, but I know you've done a lot of work in imitation learning. And so can you kind of give a brief overview of imitation learning and kind of how that compares to RL?
Yeah. So the idea behind imitation learning is that, it's often difficult to define reward functions, or even if you have a reward function, it can take a really long time for the agent to be able to actually solve a task from scratch. So the idea behind imitation learning is that instead of having an agent have to figure things out on its own, we want to be able to maybe show it how to do something. So let's say you have somebody that knows how to solve a task. They can just basically take over the agent and say, this is how you do it. And then you use that experience to try to learn something like a policy for the agent.
And so breaking that down a little bit, there's a lot of terminology. Is there a difference between things like behavioral cloning, apprenticeship learning, imitation learning? Is that really a different taxonomy, or is that all kind of the same thing?
Yeah, so I would say that behavioral cloning, apprenticeship learning, inverse reinforcer learning, these are all imitation learning approaches. The main difference between these different sorts of methods is how you go about learning things. So something like behavioral cloning tries to learn in a supervised manner. So let's say in a given state, your demonstrator has taken an action and you have a bunch of these different samples. Behavioral cloning would just try to learn in the state which action did the expert take and learn that in a supervised manner. Whereas something like apprenticeship learning or inverse learning approaches aim to learn a reward function. And then from that reward function, they can do reinforcement learning. So rather than having the supervised learning setting, you actually do have agents interacting with its environment and learning value functions and that sort of thing.
So is that like learning a reward function that maximally describes the trajectories you've encountered?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a few questions came up about your paper on latent policies from observations. Can you give us a brief overview at kind of maybe a basic level? What are latent policies and kind of what was the big idea here?
Yeah. So the idea behind this work, so imitation learning typically assumes that in the state you have an action that the demonstrator has given you. But if you want to have agents that can just like go off and learn from YouTube or learn from watching people or that sort of thing, then you often don't have access to actions. And so this approach is typically like when you want to learn or to imitate without actions, this is typically known as imitation from observation. And so in this work, what we wanted to do was to try to, given a sequence of videos, infer a latent policy. So we don't know the names of actions. And so you can imagine like if you're watching your friend play a game, for example, that you haven't seen before, you can just watch them play and often you know like what you should be doing, even though you might not necessarily know the controller or like how to actually control things. And so this was the idea behind this work, was just like, how can we learn a policy like that? We don't know the names of actions, but we know this is what things look like. This is what behavior looks like. And so that's just the idea behind a latent policy. It just means it's hidden. We don't know the names of the actions, but we can figure something out based only on these videos.
Interesting. So it seems like imitation learning could be a lot more efficient because we're starting with these kind of expert examples. Do you find that to be the case? And is there a kind of rule of thumb of how much more efficient as compared to things like Q learning or other kinds of off-policy learning?
Yeah, it's definitely more efficient in terms of environment interactions. So I don't have an exact answer for how much more efficient it is. probably orders of magnitude more efficient. And it depends on how many demonstrations you get though. If you only get like a single demonstration, then that might not necessarily help your agent that much. But if you get someone playing something or showing you how to do something for hours upon hours, then I mean, you basically solve the task for the agent. So there's really just this trade-off between how much interaction do you want the agent to have in the environment, and how much do you want your demonstrator to actually have to spend their life having to show an agent how to do something. So that's the main, I guess, disadvantage, is that you have to have someone that's showing the agent how to do things.
Does that scale with the difficulty of the task? A simple task like cart pull maybe doesn't show a big benefit, and something like coin run would show a very large benefit, or is that not the case?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess, yeah, cart pull definitely learns more quickly than something like coin run would. So you would probably require fewer demonstrations for that. The problem with cart pull, and a lot of problems, is that the action space is continuous, and it gets a little bit more difficult. Like if you have a high dimensional controller, like a robot or something, it's actually not that easy to get these demonstrations. Yeah, so there's also a trade-off in that, and like how much of an expert do you need? Like how much does someone actually have to know how to control something?
Ashley, one follow-up that I wanted to ask with regards to this learning from kind of expert moves is we recently did a reading session for AlphaGo, the original AlphaGo paper, and I believe they also treat like the bootstrapping of the initial model as kind of sort of an imitation learning problem, where they start off with just a bunch of expert moves that have been done, and but they treat it as supervised learning. It's just, if you see this board, what do you do next? And what's the probability that an expert will play that? Do you think that was, I guess, a simple approach, or do you feel that there was something that could have been done that's more sophisticated or better? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I guess treating it as a supervised learning approach is basically what behavioral cloning does. And it is pretty much the simplest, I would say, sort of imitation learning approach. I guess it just depends on how much you want the agent to be able to learn online. So behavioral cloning is nice because you can learn these policies completely offline, so the agent never has to interact with the environment. But if you want to do something like inverse reinforcement learning, or Gail, if you've discussed this approach, it requires the agent to actually have to interact with the environment and like play a bunch of games and that sort of thing. So it depends on the kind of efficiency you're looking at or looking for, and how expensive it is to run the simulator, how much time it takes, and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact trade-offs you're interested in there, but I think behavioral cloning is a good place to start.
So in this work, we're learning primarily from these state transitions. So we don't have a kind of a traditional reward signal. So is there like an assumption baked in that the experience we're observing is good?
Yes. So in the imitating latent policies from observation work, that is an assumption. That's typically an assumption with behavioral cloning style approaches, where because you're learning in a supervised manner, you're learning the distribution of your experts' actions. You assume that they know what they're doing. Otherwise, you're just going to learn to do bad. So there isn't typically any learning that takes place afterwards, so one thing you can do, I guess, is initialize your policy with these behavioral cloned, or in our case, our ILPO is what we called it, policy. And then you can do something like reinforcement learning if you have the reward function. So then you would have that interaction, and then it would be able to learn to adapt to whatever the reward signal was.
So is that something like we see with amateur play and then we try and explore from there?
Sorry, what do you mean by amateur play here?
So maybe we start learning from some expert play. Can we then learn a better policy from that point? Kind of use that as a jumping off point and start exploring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and people do this often. The paper I was talking about, Gale, or generative adversarial imitation learning. I think they learn a behavioral cloned policy first. I think they do that. I've seen some papers that do that sort of thing, and then they learn on top of that.
Have you thought about combining this kind of thing with maybe a sparse reward signal?
Not really. I mean, so the idea behind this approach was that we don't use rewards at all. It's basically like a supervised learning approach, and so it's just learning to figure out these latent actions that we call them. And so in this scenario, you don't use the reward function. And so yeah, if we wanted to use the reward, if we were in a sparse reward setting, then I think it would be nice to initialize the policy to these sort of expert policies. And because it'll allow you to reach this difficult to reach reward more easily, given that experience.
Cool. So another one of your papers we got a lot of questions on was deep deterministic dynamics gradients.
Mm-hmm.
Can you cover that at kind of a basic level? And there's a new Q function defined.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get into some of the ideas of that.
Sure.
Actually, before we move to that paper, I had one just small technicality question about the Ilpo paper. The graphs for mountain car and cart pull show like this baseline of an expert play. I was wondering who this expert in cart pull and mountain car is. Like,
That's a good question. It's not a person.
It's not a
what
person.
we do is no. So we just trained a reinforcement learning agent, generated a policy from that agent, and that's our expert. That's a common thing that people do, because getting human demonstrations is difficult, and people often don't know what they're doing. So if you're just interested in the idea of learning from demonstrations, then you just get the expert from some oracle that you have already trained.
I see. But like for things like Atari, those DeepMind papers, they have like expert baselines. Those are legit people, or?
Yeah. Those are people.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was my one question.
That's good.
Okay.
I thought Ashley was playing carpool, left, right, trying to get that carpool to the top.
No, Ph.D. was already miserable enough. I think that would just put me over the top. Yeah.
So do you want to move on to the deep deterministic dynamics gradient?
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. Let's see. So the idea behind that work was, so Ilpo, that approach, again, that assumed that we had an expert, so someone that knew what they were doing. But if you want to just go off in the world and learn from just anyone that might not necessarily how to do something, it would be useful to be able to just learn something from that sort of experience and then build upon it. Sorry. So the idea behind this work was that we wanted to try to learn a value function basically given only sequences of observation. So again, without access to actions. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to learn an off-policy value function that would allow us to learn optimal or good policies from suboptimal sequences of observations. So this is where the idea of QSS came from. We wanted to try to define a value function instead of what is the value for going or taking an action in a given state and acting greedily from there. Because we don't have access to actions, what we want to do is say, in a state, what is the value for moving to a neighboring state? And then, acting greedily and, maximizing your QSS values. So that was that was the main idea behind it. And instead of having a policy that said in the state, what action should you take? We had this model tau that said in the state, what next state should you move to? And then we had an inverse dynamics model that said, given a state and this sort of proposed next state that comes from the model tau, tell me what action would allow me to go from that state to the next state.
And you learn both of these simultaneously?
No. So we showed two different settings. One setting was if we're learning online, so the agent is able to interact with the environment, and this was this wasn't doing imitation from observation. This was just like, can we do better than other reinforcement learning agents in certain scenarios when it's allowed to interact with the environment. And so in that case, we were learning the inverse dynamics model at the same time. But if we're learning from observation, what we wanted to do was just allow the agent to learn as much as it could from the observations alone before it ever took any actions in the environment. And so in that case, the benefit of QSS, this formulation, was that we can learn these values completely offline without interactions with the environment. And then the agent could take a few steps in the environment to learn the inverse dynamics model. Yeah.
Very cool. So we have, I think these questions come after project 2, where the students are involved in a lot of hyperparameter tuning. And so the question is...
I remember that project.
Hyperparameters for the experiments are described nicely in tables, including initialization and learning rates. Do you have a general approach for finding the right set of hyperparameters when you start with problems?
Yeah. My general approach is to use the hyperparameters that other people have used and start from there. So yeah, this QSS work was based off of this recent paper called Twin Delayed Policy Gradients. And we just used their hyperparameters and started from there, and it turned out that they worked well. So we didn't really need to do much tuning. We probably could have done more. Maybe our approach would have ended up doing better, but it's like, yeah, it was able to do pretty well already. One thing that people do is, if you have enough computes, just run a bunch of experiments with a bunch of different hyperparameters in parallel, and then pick the parameters that work best. But this can take a lot of time, and again, it requires like a nice cluster of resources in order to be able to do this.
So we have a very technical question. I'm going to try and muscle through it.
Okay.
So the D3G agent learns, performs better with random actions injected versus just expert demonstrations. However, with QSS prime and D3G being off policy, this makes some sense. Is it that the randomness functions as an exploration function?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, one really annoying thing was, that was an annoying result, which was that, if we obtained demonstrations from a completely random demonstrator, so we obtained random observations, we were able to do much better than if we actually had an expert that gave us a complete optimal sequence of observations. But I think the reason it's related to a problem that's common in offline reinforcement learning, where you often need a good coverage of your state space, a good coverage of your action space, in order for the agent to perform well. And so I guess, having noise injected into the policy does allow for that sort of exploration, and it gives you a good coverage of your state space that, we were able to do better with that sort of data.
So is that something like expert policies kind of look the same, and so there's going to be states that you don't get to and you're going to perform poorly in just because you haven't seen?
Yeah, exactly. And with offline reinforcement learning, just taking the typical QSA formulation. You have policies that are predicting actions, and you're maximizing over those actions that are being predicted. But you've never actually necessarily taken that action in that state. And so what these policies learn to do is exploit this bias in your Q function. So it's just going to say, I don't know if this action makes sense, but it maximizes my Q function that I haven't learned very well. And so it's just going to sample these actions. And the same sort of thing happened with our approach, where it was trying to sample states that maximized our QSS values, even if those states didn't make sense.
So the formulation of QSS in this paper requires deterministic environments?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Could that formulation be changed where we get back a distribution over next states or possible next states?
Let me think about this. So, yeah, I guess the main problem with our QSS formulation and the reason it didn't work in non-deterministic settings was because, so in QSA, if you take an action and you end up in a state, you get these rewards that say, this is the reward you got for taking this action in this state. But in QSS, you might get a state that you haven't actually reached. And so the rewards basically won't necessarily correspond to the states that you've reached, if that makes any sense. And so basically, I think the way to fix this would be to, instead of having, so basically the way it works is we sample a state action, or sorry, state next state from the agent interacting with the environment. And that's the next state that the agent landed in. I think what we need to do is we also need to plug in the states that our model tau proposed. So yeah, so it would be like Q of S, tau of S, and that would say, well, this was a reward you got when the policy or when the model proposed a state, even though you didn't actually reach that state, but when you propose that state, this is the reward that you're going to get. And I think that would fix some of the problems with stochasticity. If that makes any sense. It's hard to say all this in words. But yeah, I definitely think there's a lot there. It would be an interesting follow-up paper to actually try to fix some of these problems with stochasticity.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think you answered their second and third questions too.
Okay.
So do we have other QSS questions before we move on to more general stuff?
So quick question. Actually, let's see. Yeah, I may have two. So I think the student, was referring to something, similar to distributional Q learning. I guess they did.
Yeah.
What is it, 51 or something like that? I forget the name.
51.
Yeah. So that kind of, distributional Q functions, but for QSS, would that be doable in this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think
I'm
so.
second author. I'm kidding.
You can be first author.
No, I don't want to lead it.
No, I think
the other
I think
question
that would actually work. Yeah.
So a quick question I had is, did you find any issues? So usually the formulation of the reward function is, RSA, and some folks actually do SA S prime. Did you have any issues with that? Like when you think of, first of all, I never understand why not just use S prime all the time and just forget about the SA, because it's really, that's it. You take everything into account. But did you find any issues while doing that? Because you mentioned that the reward that you get may not be related to the state that you landed in. Is that the reason why?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, first of all, I feel like, we're typically the ones that define our reward functions, and we can say that they're whatever we want them to be. So theoretically, it made sense to say that a reward function, you get a reward for going from one state and landing in the next state. And we just needed to do that just to be able to have some guarantees that this was equivalent to QSA in deterministic settings. But I don't actually know. I think so. We ran a Majoko task, and I don't know like what their reward function really is, because it's I think it's mostly deterministic as well. And so, yeah, you get a reward for taking an action, but it's pretty much like the same thing as getting a reward for landing in a state because taking an action always leads to the same state anyway.
Is deterministic, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so some of these questions move into kind of general ML, RL, deep RL, AI kind of stuff. And so this is a question for an RL researcher. How important is it to study deep learning and other machine learning fields?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it depends maybe on the kind of research that you're interested in. I think when I started off, I mean, deep learning wasn't really that big of a thing. And so I was only studying reinforcement learning. But as the field progressed, we found that it was useful to know about deep learning because, before we were having to hand tune our features and that sort of thing. And deep learning allows you to not necessarily have to do that. And so it's useful to know about these deep learning techniques. And so I think that you can definitely do reinforcement learning, sit and like only do research on like core reinforcement learning problems. But there's a lot that we can learn from deep learning techniques and machine learning techniques that often inform our decisions that we make. And they often have figured things out that we don't know about because we're not necessarily in those fields. So I think it's definitely helpful to be a little bit well-rounded and not only study reinforcement learning.
As kind of a follow-up to that, how did you get into reinforcement learning in the first place? Like what drew you to it?
Yeah. So I started out in undergrad, and there are these research experiences for undergrads. This was like an NSF program. And like one year I was looking for internships and I was like, oh, this seems interesting. It allows you to like go off into someone's lab outside of the university and do research. And so I just signed up for one of them. And I happened to end up landing in Andy Bartow's lab. And that's how I got introduced to reinforcement learning. So yeah, it was like a pretty cool experience and I've just stuck with it ever since then.
So for a lot of our students, this course is maybe kind of the first taste of writing research papers, or maybe something like a research paper. And so we have some questions on, for you, how long does writing typically take? Have you gotten better over time? How do you start? Do you start with an idea or an experiment?
Yeah. I mean, 24 hours, right? That's what you do all the work and then you write the paper. No, I'm just playing. I write as I go. And so I don't usually leave things until the last minute for writing. When I have an idea, I just write it down. Even if I'm not going to follow that idea, I just like to have all my thoughts in one place, like even in like share LaTeX or I guess Overleaf. I just write all these ideas down, and if I had to take them out, I eventually will. And so as I read papers, I, write up those papers, write up my thoughts of them, and add it to the LaTeX file. And as I start working on the approach and trying different things, I also add it to the paper. And so by the time it comes to paper writing, it's just a lot of, maybe adding in experiments or figures and that sort of thing. I don't think that that's how I started off though. I definitely used to be like a very last minute paper writer. And I think that's probably why most of my papers got rejected early on in my PhD because by the time I would finish, they would be pretty incomplete. But yeah, so I think that, people have different techniques. Another thing I guess I like to do is I have an outline of just like how I want the paper to be structured, maybe what research questions that I want to have answered. But I like to sort of work as I go with it.
What kind of, this is my follow-up question. Do you have any kind of framework you like for experiment logging, for kind of capturing, your code and everything as you go and results in kind of an organized manner?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably not the most organized person with this. I mean, I use GitHub so I can, checkpoint things. Or like say, like if you run an experiment, it's nice to know when you, know what your code was when you ran those experiments. But I usually just put them in folders and like write things down. But all of the hyperparameters and that sort of thing are usually in the code anyway. I think people probably have better ways of doing this. I know some code bases will save like the model, save all your hyperparameters and that sort of thing. So if you save the model, then at least you can know like what your hyperparameters were and like what the architecture was, and you can rerun things with a fixed seed or with your seeds that you used in order to know is this repeatable? Like, is this the code I actually ran? And so you can have that sort of sanity check. Yeah.
What's it like to be a researcher in such a fast-moving field? How do you stay on top of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's interesting because when I started out, no one knew really. I mean, people knew, but not a lot of people knew what reinforcement learning was. And so it's been interesting to see it sort of grow. And like, again, yeah, there's courses on it and, you go to conferences and people know what it is. So I think it's fun in that regard. Keeping up with papers, I used to be much better, I think, than I am now at this because there's just so many and the field's growing so fast. Like I would go to archive and like read papers every day and like just see like, oh, this is interesting, or just read abstracts, not necessarily the whole paper, but just to know what the sort of approaches were. But that, it just becomes intractable, I think. There's just too many papers. And so I think I mostly focus on what the conference papers are, or like, going to conferences and seeing what the main results are there, and going on Twitter and seeing what people are tweeting about, which is unfortunate because, mostly the most hyped things get tweeted in, maybe less flashy results aren't, but at least it's good, I think, for saving time because, it just becomes impossible to keep up with everything.
We have a student who's an NLP researcher, and they're interested in kind of the intersection of NLP and RL. And if you have any insight on what a good area of focus might be, text generation or question answering, and if this is industry or academic focused. Yeah.
So let's see. There's definitely work that tries to combine NLP with reinforcement learning. So there are these sort of conversational agents that can learn in the sort of self-play manner that you saw from AlphaGo. So like you have agents talking to each other and trying to like say things that make sense and iterating on that using language. So that's one thing that I've seen people do. Another thing that I think has become really popular is being able to define goals in natural language. So you can say like, hey, this is what the goal is, and the agent will try to maybe, given those language instructions, infer what the goal is. And so I think Dhruv and Devi from Georgia Tech, they've done a lot of work, I think, in like visual question answering. And so like given, let's say like let me think of like an example. Oh, yeah, okay, what color is the vase, for example, and you give that as like a language input, then the agent needs to navigate in order to find the vase in order to be able to answer that question. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting research that's been going on these days, and I don't think it's only industry. Or only academic. Like for the for the conversational agents, there are plenty of companies that are interested in having agents that can, chatbots and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Is this example that you mentioned related to? I think I saw this in Facebook research. Facebook, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think they do have a few repos and packages of examples and things like that. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, they have a really cool environment that's available for people to use. And yeah, it's an RL environment. So do you use Gym? I think you were using Gym at some point, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it might be a
Yep.
Gym environment. So yeah, these things exist. Yeah.
So the next question is, given deep learning, so neural nets are often thought of as a black box. How can we gain confidence in agents produced by deep learning, and in particular deep RL, that they will perform as expected?
hmm Yeah, I guess the main thing that we need is ablations. So just being able to make sure you understand different parts of the model and seeing like, okay, if I take that part out, then it doesn't do well. So that we know that that part is important. There are a lot of problems with reinforcement learning in that you don't often know if something is underperforming um, because your model just doesn't make any sense, or because your architecture doesn't make sense, or because the reward function doesn't make sense. And so what I usually do is actually I try to start off with really simple problems. So I always start off with grid worlds. I think a lot of people like to go off and like try to solve the really hard tasks initially. But I really think that it's important to make sure that your algorithm can solve these really basic tasks, because if you can't solve grid worlds, I mean, I can't think of any like meaningful algorithm that like RL algorithm that wouldn't be able to do that but could solve something really difficult. So yeah, I think it's important to simplify your problem as much as you can first and then build from there.
Yeah, interesting. I'll plug my work in neural network verification. That's kind of how we're approaching guarantees for deep RL.
Yeah, cool.
Let's see. More career-related set of questions. So, what is the most rewarding part of your work and the least rewarding? Yeah, so this question may seem trite, but it's hard to come across many honest responses about working in the AI field.
Yeah. Let's see. So the most rewarding, I would say, is just so I get to work with a really amazing group of researchers, and there's so many really exciting ideas that are happening. So I think it's just really great to have an environment where you have people that you can work with that are really excited about the same sorts of problems that you're interested in. Um, I guess the least rewarding part is I think it's really hard to uh like not become obsessed with how productive you are, like how successful your research is, like I'll admit that I go to my Google Scholar page often and I check my H index and all these things and I look and see that, has someone cited me. And then I look at, other groups that have published more frequently than me. And I think this was like probably a big problem in my PhD, where I just felt like wow, like this person is doing so great, like, and I just keep getting rejected. And I think that it's really hard to sort of get out of that loop. I guess it's like related to the imposter syndrome, although I don't necessarily feel like an imposter, but it's still hard to like, yeah, not compare yourself to others.
Do you think the system reinforces that kind of thought process?
I think a bit. I mean, yeah, like you often see the same people that people often get invited to give talks, and when they get invited to give talks, then people say, "Oh, that person gave a good talk. I'm going to invite them to give a talk at my thing." And so you see those people more and more. And researchers become more and more famous, I guess, and people, I mean, it's difficult not to wonder like, oh, well, why isn't that me? Like, why didn't they pick me? I can talk about that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think it's definitely, the field has a lot of hype, and there is definitely certain ideas that get more hype than others. So yeah, it's definitely a sort of cycle that's going on, I think.
So this next question is about
kind of related to the system. I was watching Lex Friedman's podcast where Professor Isbell is the guest. I think it was released
Hmm.
really recently.
Yeah.
Have you saw that, by the way, Ashley?
Yeah, I watched it.
They go into kind of um, I guess a little bit more deeper, or I'm not sure if it's deep, but like the nitty-gritty aspects of research and politics, and how it seems like, conservative research is winning over like more kind of far-fetched, um, I don't know, dreamy research, like more um, not long-term, but something like more innovative.
Hmm.
Do you feel that's kind of happening? Like, do you think that the field is becoming a little bit more incremental as opposed to going in more far-reaching directions?
Yeah. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I mean, I think that the really interesting, or not necessarily interesting, but I guess flashy or like moonshot style reinforcement learning ideas take a long time to solve. And so maybe it feels like things are only incremental, but that's because it's just taking a while to actually be able to, figure this problem out or get things to work. And everything builds upon itself, So something might seem incremental, but people are building upon those ideas, and it take some time to really be able to um, get to a place where you can use all those different ideas and combine them in a way that actually allows you to solve something difficult. Um, but I think there are definitely a lot of incremental works, but I think every approach has its place, and uh, shoulders of giants and something something. Yeah, I think we're a community and we're learning from each other.
So I would say is like gradient descent. When you are too far from the optimal solution, you need to actually do like really large steps to get closer and closer. Perhaps we're getting very, very close to a really good solution. So, I mean, the incremental
Yeah,
stuff is really not that bad, right? I mean, if you have
The learning
a
rate decay.
right, something like that, right? So just saying.
That's
yeah,
interesting.
I think so.
Cool.
So this next question uh, asks about how Google and Uber are developing RL systems, and I'm guessing you can't get into proprietary specifics, but I think the question is more about what kind of teams are they forming? What's their approach to this kind of thing? And is there a place for CS master's students, or is it strictly a
Hmm.
PhD uh, domain?
Yeah. So I guess when I was at Uber, they definitely had people with masters. Actually, we had Adrian from the OMSCS. Yeah, from the program was one of my teammates. And now he's at OpenAI. Yeah, he got a master's and he's the research scientist at OpenAI. So there's definitely places in industry for this. Um, I think so. Yeah, Google has like their residency program. Um, where they train people to do research and reinforcement learning, or whatever, deep learning research and that sort of thing. You don't necessarily need a PhD for that in order to be able to do your research. And so yeah, a lot of different companies have research engineer roles, and you can get those as master's students. It might be a little bit more difficult to get research scientist positions, without a PhD, although, like I said, it exists. And even like as a research engineer, you're often doing the same sort of work that a research scientist would do. So yeah, there's not that much
Can
of
you
a
actually go
difference.
a little bit over sort of the details of those two positions and perhaps a third one that may be there? But what are the roles, very, very briefly?
Yeah. So I guess I would say that research scientists often, I mean, it depends on the company really, but they often define their own agendas. They're able to, yeah, just really guide their own research. And I would say that research engineers are also able to, again, depending on where you are, they have freedom to be able to do that sort of thing as well. Um, but they also might have some responsibilities, like engineering responsibilities, where the support research scientists, and the maybe engineer certain things that would be useful for getting the research going.
What is the shift from academic to industry been like? Is the work a lot different, or are you still working on a lot of kind of fundamental research? Does that have to do with kind of the places you've landed as opposed to maybe something that was more strictly industry kind of lab?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the places that I've been have pretty much been, industry research labs. And so it's very similar to academia. I mean, I'm doing research, I'm able to publish and that sort of thing. I think the main difference is that we get access to a lot more resources than you would as a PhD student. And that's actually really helps a lot. And so, yeah, when I was like in the period between going from Uber and going to DeepMind, and I was still trying to do research, I was like, how did I ever do this? I mean, it's difficult. I don't know. Maybe it's more difficult when it's better to maybe not know what you're missing out on, because I figured I knew how to do it back then. But once I had to like go and try to run large experiments and that sort of thing, it does become more difficult without this infrastructure set in place.
For someone that's in the program and is interested in following a similar path, are there kind of big long-term goals they should set, and then more kind of smaller immediate steps that they can take?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what exact path you mean. If you mean the path of getting into research and not necessarily doing a PhD, then I think that it's still it's useful to try to get some research experience while you're still attending the university, like maybe reaching out to professors, because I think once you get outside of the university, it gets more difficult to have these sorts of collaborations. So yeah, just maybe reaching out to professors and trying to see if there's anything that they could use help with. And then there's the residency program, which this didn't exist when I was, graduating from undergrad and going into PhD. But I think it's just such a great thing. And so the idea behind residencies is that, after you graduate from master's or undergrad or even PhD, you can go to a company like Google or OpenAI, Facebook, and they basically allow you to spend a year there and work with researchers within the team, figure out how to do research and to figure out, how to work with people and that sort of thing. And I think it's just like a really great experience. And typically after that, you're able to continue working at that company as a researcher, and you're able to get in, apply to PhD programs with this like really great experience under your belt. And so, yeah, I think that that's like a really, really great thing to try. And then, so yeah, if you're interested in doing PhD, I think it's important to have research and have some research experience. So just trying to get that in some way, even if it's not like a full-blown publication, maybe, you submit to a workshop or that sort of thing. I think it's really important to have that sort of experience.
So
Actually,
our
quick
students,
comment.
go ahead.
Oh, quick comment that I think Adrian, so Adrian actually was a TA with us as well. I think he got into the Uber AI through the residency program, right? I think he applied to the residency, and he actually wrote a paper. It was a pretty big paper, I think, on the Montezuma's Revenge. Yeah, Go Explore. There you go. That's the paper, right? So I mean, it's doable. So for our OMS CS students, I mean, it's doable. And you have a proven path, of course, not the only path, but definitely one. So it's a good example there.
Yeah.
So our students tend to be kind of independent, and I think maybe that's partly because of the program and how it's structured. And so, is this the kind of thing that they can pursue on their own, or should they really be working to try and get affiliated with a professor or a lab or one of these residency programs?
I mean, I think it's definitely easier to have somebody to work with that has experience doing research, because you don't necessarily know what are all the things that people have tried. Yeah, I know that when I was getting my PhD, Charles would be able to tell me like, oh, well, that's been done, that sort of thing. And so it's good to have someone that knows these things, and it'll save you a lot of time. I do think that there are definitely people that can work independently, and have published papers independently, but it really is much easier, I think, if you have someone to collaborate with who can help you figure out your path there.
So
Kind of
I
related
want to
to
make
that.
a comment.
Hmm.
It's a funny comment very quickly that one of our students once submitted a paper to archive on the lunar land and how to solve it and so on. And we were like,
Hmm.
dude, first of all, that's a violation of the honor code. You do not do that. But he was arguing that this is my research. I'm like, that is not research. I swear to God, that's been done before.
Yeah.
Not original. Sorry, it's
Yeah,
a
I
funny
think,
comment.
no, I get it. I mean, I think, yeah, when people start out, they think that, and even I thought, like if you do something, you're like, you know, implementing people's approaches, and that feels like research, right? Like it feels
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm implementing this AI idea and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's hard to figure out, well, what actually constitutes as research and that sort of thing. And yeah, you need people like Miguel to tell you, like, wait a minute, no, yeah,
It's
it's
been
just
done
helpful to have
before.
people. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Takara. I don't know. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sorry. So you brought up working with Professor Isbell, and you said starting off you started off at Andy Barto's lab. I was just wondering if you have like if you took away one thing from each of those people, like what would it be? Like what is it like working with them? Um,
Yeah. Um, interesting question. I mean, yeah,
One
I was in
second. This
Andrew.
is being
Yeah,
recorded, just so you know.
everybody's great. I mean, I mean, they really are. I mean, I guess this is a note to end on maybe. I enjoyed working with both of them. I was only in Andy's lab for a summer. Um, but I mean, you often think that when you're working with, or when you see, uh, I guess the bigger name people or people who have published a lot, it can be intimidating, like you think that, this person is famous and they're not going to want to talk to me. But I think that, I don't know, that's one thing I don't like this idea of fame within the field. And like, people are people, we're all people, everybody's just doing research. There shouldn't be this notion of fame, and I think everybody should be approachable. I think for the most part, the people that I've worked with have been approachable and just really great people to work with. And I think everybody just wants to help. So yeah, I guess that's how I'll answer that question.
well, I
Uh,
was
the- go
like
ahead.
you talked about like importance of starting with small problems. Like for example, were there any like practical things that you took away from them? Like, oh, if I write this kind of thing, Professor Isbell will definitely say this, or Andy Bardo is all starts working like this, or anything kind of practical like that, or
Um, yeah, I mean, for the most part, Charles was, again, I didn't work with Andy that long. It was just a summer
okay,
back in 2009. So I think yeah, that was a long time ago. But Charles, I mean, for the most part, he was always very open to allow us to work on whatever we wanted to. Even if, even if the idea was crazy and it would maybe like end up taking a long time to do and then, wouldn't necessarily work out. Um, he always allowed us to work on whatever we thought was interesting. And then I think we learned on, through trial and error, really what we probably shouldn't be working on. And I think it really just makes sense to, if you have an idea, I mean, I guess it depends. Do you have a problem that you want to solve and something that you think that reinforcement learning would be good for? Then yeah, go for that problem. but if you really only care about doing reinforcement learning and you have a really exciting idea in reinforcement learning, then start with the grid world and, maybe move to Majoko and, like maybe eventually try it on like a more difficult problem. But if that's not what you care about, then just focus, I think, on the research aspect of it and the theory behind it and that sort of thing, and save the more difficult things for later on for future work, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah.
As a kind of closing thought, and since you are so experienced with this course being one of the originators, do you have any advice for our students on how to get the most out of this course and maybe the program in general?
That's a good question. I don't know. Listen to your TAs. They know what they're talking about. Yeah, I don't know. I think, like I said, I think the course has grown so much since I've started, and I'm just so happy to see like where you all have gotten in terms of the projects and these sorts of activities. So I think just trying to participate is a really good thing in going to these sorts of things. Yeah, I guess one other thing is, if you're interested in doing research, then really, I think, try to reach out to people. They can be your peers, the people from the course. Reach out to professors in order to, like, while you're, in the program, try to get that experience. I guess the final thing is, just try to learn what as much as you can. Like, you have a community of people who, are learning reinforcement learning or are very knowledgeable, have written books on reinforcement learning. And so, yeah, reach out to them with your ideas, reach out to them, try to learn what you can, because I'll tell you, like, once you get out of, out of school or whatever, these resources, I mean, in industry, you still have those resources, but I think just having an academic setting, like, it's like unparalleled, like it's very difficult to get this sort of, this experience with peers and, experts and that sort of thing. So yeah, utilize these sorts of resources, I would say.
Awesome. And that's all for today, actually. So in closing, just thank you so much for attending and doing this session for our students. And I'm going to say, as one who saw your career kind of take off like that, keep making us proud, and we'll keep reading your papers, and hopefully you come back sometime in the future. Okay?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been really great to chat with you all, and I'm again very proud of where you've gone. So yeah, take care, everyone. Thank you.